have now reworked my instruction for the problem set that we're going to do and realizing that, and again, I don't suggest using Gen AI tools to do the work for you, but I want to give you a heads up on something. If you do, you may see, and if you submit, will hurt your grade. But more importantly, just to talk about a concept that CS50 doesn't. Because there's definitely two sides or multiple ways to think about, foreign and primary keys. But one of the things, and I've given you example here, and I've said, right, here's the warning. When you're implementing the donut shop, the Union Square, because you're going to design this week. This week, you're going to take what you've learned through part one and part two and actually design a database based on the requirements. And one thing that can be, again, something we haven't covered but could be generated, again, just to also help you understand what this is, it's called a composite key. So in this case, what is a composite key, right? So actually, when you can see them when you see a primary key. Let me just talk about this database quick. It's actually one I just generated. Students, courses, and a grade table, right? And in this case, I had it put some notes to talk about the uses of the primary key in order to uniquely identify should only get one grade per course. And this is important when you start thinking about specifically our problem set. So it can be something that you would see is that this would be a composite. It's a composite based on a primary and a foreign key put together to make a uniqueness. But in this case, don't do that for this problem set. Know that it does exist and there are good reasons and bad reasons for using it. But you will need to, and I showed the refactor here, which is what we've normally seen, right? We have a foreign key for the student and the course ID, and that is the way when you work on the problem set you're going to want to think about, okay? So what I decided to do here was I'm going to go over the requirements for the Dunkin' donut shop, and I'll discuss how I grade it, okay? And then I'll come back and talk about something you could do as a reply, and I think it might be fun. Okay, so here are let me go ahead and open these. These are the requirements. I'm just going to drop me for a minute here. So you have a donut shop, right? So in the donut shop needs a database, right? So you're going to be creating a database. Again, their CS50's requirements as far as what you write are a little different than mine, but here are the expectations. You'd create a database by writing create table. And implementation of the details are up to you, and you should minimally ensure that your database meets the expectations and the sample data, and this is key. So it goes through a list in donuts, ingredients, donuts, orders, customers, and then the sample data, okay? So what I did for our instructions, okay, that's the CS51, and then hold on, let me bring up mine. Okay, so here is the setup, right? So in this case, we're creating a new, at the root directory, PS2 underneath PS1. It's the same level. Now you have other folders there. So now inside of the PS2, you create donut, okay? Now in this case, you're going to create a new file, copy previous file, change the proof of work, and then do a commit, and then review, more than I did there, right? And now in the instruction here, I'm going to go through how I want you to approach it, but you will need to create that donut database, okay? So you can do that either after you've thought about this one or, at some point before you, of course, run this, because that's part of what you need to have is that structure in there. So the step one is to think about the donuts and the ingredients, right? So based on your understanding of the requirements, write the SQL that will create one or more tables, okay? So you're going to see this repeated because I'm just giving you, okay, write SQL based on the requirements. So that's where you read the requirements and write your requirements, right? Now in this case, I'm not going to have you do the POE in that sense, because your proof of work is going to be in your comments that you're going to place in your SQL file. And this is what I mean by this, right? So in your SQL file, use comments, as we've done, to identify the requirements that your table design satisfies. Okay, so it doesn't have to be long, right? It just has to be in there. It's like this, SQL meets these requirements or satisfies these requirements in the, table or tables I'm creating. Okay, and then you do your first draft of donuts and ingredients. So then you do your orders, right? So now you think about orders. Again, this is one or more. I'm not being specific to the requirement here. Same kind of content, that you're identify the requirements, put that as comments, right? This does not have to be long, and then run your, and I didn't say that here, but run your SQL and output it to your proof of work and your Git workflows, right? Your first draft of orders. And then you do your customers same way. Okay, so these first three have that same approach, right? And then draft. Now at this point, again, if you're working over break, and this is important to keep in mind because I'm not necessarily working over break. I may work for the first couple of days to get content out for week 15, but the rest of it I'm traveling. And that's why this review process for this week is going to be way important, right? Because, and I say that saying that we're going to be out on break, but in this case, right, you take the break, you've done that part, and I'm assuming you're taking the break probably because you're in the week of after spring break. But then you have to consider the sample data, right? So now this one is a little different. Based on your understanding of this requirement, modify any of your previous SQL. Yes, you can add tables if you feel like you need them, right? And note it, right? Note again, and I would expect to see some modification here, right? Here you want to be specific on how your database design handles each sample data example. Once you have your SQL ready, drop all your tables, and this is important, right? So once you have it ready, drop all your tables and rerun your code, right? Run all your code. Now, I didn't talk about commenting out here, and I probably should have, but I'll tell you now that, this is important because once you write this, if you run your proof of work, of course, you can't run, you'll get an error. So I didn't specifically say that, but I'm hoping right now you have that. But in this last one, I would expect you to drop all the tables, uncomment out, and have one schema that is run for the database itself. Okay? So the key is going to be about this is that I will then look at your output and give you feedback. Now, if I'm seeing on break, I'll give you output about what you've created so far. If we're doing a second review, or if for some reason you submitted the whole thing, then I will look at the whole thing compared to the design that I did. Okay, and matter of fact, I'm going to look at something real quick. So I ended up having 6 tables in my design, so I'm just giving you that idea there. Okay, so and I've changed the way this is. So this, all the queries and the comments is the bulk or a large bulk of this in there. So make sure you're telling in the comments how that part of your design meets that specific requirement. Okay. So now back here, right? So that's what you need to do for this week. So I have at this point actually seen a couple of you already have done week 13 where you're playing around with the prompt. You're learning a little more about how to approach and answer questions about it. And some of you I've already seen do some ERDs. So I thought, you know what? Because I'd already thought about this for this week, so I thought perfect timing. So I want you to consider the database that was created from the prompt in week 13. And then revisit your session and give the prompt instructions to output the schema into DBML. And then copy that into this site. And it actually will create you a really nice ERD. I'll show you in a minute. And then play around. And in your reply, tell us your experience. I'm not going to make you do replies. This is your, spring break, so to speak. You don't even have to post your output, mostly because if I was going to have you do that, I would make you do it in the public repo and then I'd have to go over that. And I'm like, you know what? No. I mean, by the way, good to know how to do because I don't like things attached into Canvas for my own reasons. But let me show you how I did this, okay? So I went over to my session that I did, and then I just said, give me the DBML for the schema, and it was the conversation, the prompt that I already had. And so it outputs this. So it changes the schema into a new syntax, and then that syntax you can take over to the link I gave you, the DB diagram. And what's nice here is it really gives you a little more fun, interactive way to look at these. And I think that's great. So you could just take whatever's going to be already set up. I did mine based on the schema it had produced. And I really liked it. And there's different ways to look at it. So play around with this, right? And, maybe have it add another table, whatever you want to do here. But I want you to have the experience of taking schema, getting DBML, that language markup. I believe that's ML markup language. Actually, I think I have a post. Yeah. What is the? I actually had a post already, right? Yeah, markup. So there's actually markdown, which I use for my instruction and we use for notes. So this is markup language. So this is database markup language. A good thing, another good thing to know about. Okay. Again, that's what you need to do here. That's the process of just also reminding you, and I'll end with this, right? That on spring break, I'm going to probably be working a little bit at the beginning of break, maybe even the weekend of break. And then I will be off until we come back because I'm going to be doing a little traveling. So, this process of submitting for review, right, I'll do my best where if you're in that timeline before I leave. But once I start traveling, it is very hard to give you that feedback. But just know the way I grade, know what I'm looking for because I should see a progression of thought. I should see a change of the way you're meeting the requirements based on the way I've had you move through that. And I hope you get a break. I honestly, I mean, the thing about spring break, and you heard me say this last week, is it's both good and bad because it's good that maybe it's time, it's spring, it's wonderful, let's go take a break. But it's also like trying to make sure you're up to date, right, with this course. If you're watching this on week 13, the chances are you're up to date. But if you're watching this at the very beginning after spring break, we're having to kind of ramp up again and get used to things. It's just the way life is. Anyway, have a great one, and I will post this the week before we go out so those who want to can actually work on it before they head out and give me any feedback because I will also then attempt to have the review done. Anyway, that's it. Talk to you later. Bye.